Everybody, Jake here with TrendSpider to go over the weekend video into the last few trading days of September. What we have here is SPY. We'll go over QQQ and IWM as well as Vixx for the broad market side of things, and then we'll go over a few charts that were requested on our Twitter. First things first, we're going to highlight a new feature that we just released on Friday, i.e. today. You can see here that we have the 3-point extension. So instead of just connecting 2 points and having a fib level, you now have 3 different points to create the fib extension. We have quite a few partners already using this, so make sure to check them out on Twitter as we will be retweeting them over the weekend. So you can see here that we did bounce off this 0.786 extension very nicely, and we'll have to see what happens into next week. But on the weekly side of things, you can see we bounced really nicely off this area highlighted in green, which remember, as the price started moving down towards this area, all of these shares started to break even. So they stopped selling, and what happens when they stop selling? Supply dries up, and we had a nice move up into the last couple days of the week. So you can see here that we are trading right within this volume gap here. We'll have to see what happens into next week, but we do have a hollow red candle, which tells us that even though we closed below last week's close, we did close higher than what we opened at for the week. So that's where you get the hollow red candle part of this equation. Moving on into the Qs, you can see here that we do have quite an interesting setup here. Closed literally right at resistance today on Friday, and you can see here that this is going to be a crucial level into next week to break through if we want to continue up. Now, the one thing that I want to mention as well, if we anchor the volume by price from the March lows, we have a huge volume shelf forming here on the Qs. So will this hold? We'll have to see, but it looks pretty strong, especially given the weekly candle here really showing some strength. And you know, nobody knows what's going to happen in the market. We can only use charts, but this is showing some definite strength into the end of the month. Going into IWM, we will see that we did almost fill this gap almost perfectly to the cent yesterday. And then you can see we do have a pretty strong candle. However, we did close still much lower than what we really started this big move down on Wednesday at. So we'll have to see if this continues up. The one thing I want to point out is this weekly symmetrical triangle did break down. But shocker, where do we move down to? Right to this big shelf of volume here, and we bounced right off of it. Remember, this is an area that many people were holding at break even. As the price got down to this area, they stopped selling, supply dries up, and you have supply and demand kicking in. Last one is Vixx. Vixx is one that just absolutely melted today on Friday. Did have a little bit of a pop into the end of the day. However, we still do have that huge gap below on the weekly side of things. We do have elections also coming up. So is that something that could possibly pop Vixx and not fill the gap below? We'll just have to see. However, you know, the Vixx is one of those things where charting is not going to necessarily always tell the tale with this one, as it is really derived from a lot of different variables, not necessarily chartable. So going into some of the tickers into the week ahead that were requested on Twitter, let's start with AMD. This one really caught a bid nicely on the Alpha Trends anchored VWAP here and really had a nice move up today on Friday and really trying to break through this area that we kind of consolidated at for the last week. If we did break through around 78.30 or so, 78.50, that's when things get interesting. If we anchor the volume by price from this low here in June, you'll see that we do have quite the volume shelf forming here. Oops, let me zoom out. However, that volume shelf is going to initially act as supply as it did over the last couple weeks. If we break through this, this is when we may get the launchpad side of the volume shelf, and we'll just have to see how that works into the next couple weeks. On to CRM. CRM is one we haven't really looked at lately, but I mean, this is a pretty strong falling wedge here, and you can see here that we are really kind of flagging on the longer term side of things. If we anchor the volume by price from this March low, you can really see that we are forming quite a volume shelf here. And you can see essentially, as we just talked about, this is going to be a supply zone because the price is below this right now. So if we can get through this supply zone and continue up, that's when things definitely get very interesting for CRM. But for now, we are kind of stuck in this, this area, kind of acting as both supply and a volume shelf. Going into LULU, another one we haven't really looked at lately. We do have a gap above, and so this is a really nice example of using the gap snake. If I simply just turn on the gap snake here, you'll see this gap automatically pops up. Clearly a gap above that could be a target for bulls above. However, there are still some gaps below as well. So we'll just have to see how strong the market is going into the beginning of October. However, on the weekly side of things, we do have this volume shelf forming. Price did try to break through it this week, couldn't do it. We'll have to see into next week if that will change up and will continue to possibly move up. I think I read that LULU's starting a stock buyback program possibly, so there's your demand if you're looking for it. LULU, now onto SQ. SQ is one of those ones that is really forming a base here. Let's go ahead and turn off the gap snake and just look at the chart. This is one chart that I did want to use the auto trends on. So if we turn on trends here, you'll see that these trend lines automatically pop up, and we will turn them off on the weekly side of things because we're on log. And we will go back here. As you can see, we did break out of this pattern, starting to move up. We'll have to see if this next level above is going to be an area for bulls. So notice here, we really just highlighted different areas that we wanted to lock in place. There were a bunch of different trend lines on this chart. We're not wanting to use all of those. We're just wanting to use the ones that we personally maybe are looking for or fit our strategy. So there is still some discretion in the automated trend lines, but this is more of an idea generator to kind of get your brain kind of flowing to see what different kind of options there are on the table. So going into SE, actually, sorry, before we go into SE, let's look at the weekly chart. This is a pretty strong candle going into the weekly side of things. So definitely some strength here by the bulls, and obviously some strength here breaking out of this pattern and possibly testing this area above. We'll have to see what happens, and that will possibly really be a function of how strong the market is going into the week ahead. SE is one that we have looked over before. It's one of those ones that also broke through the symmetrical triangle on Friday. Definitely some strength. On the weekly side of things, if we turn log back on, you'll see here if we do anchor the volume by price from this low here on, let's pull it up, from March, you'll see that we do have quite a volume shelf forming here. So there's definitely some strength, and you can see that the price is above this volume shelf compared to the price being below some of these other volume shelves that we've been looking at before. Now remember, look here on September 7th, or the week of September 7th, this initially was a supply zone. And then as the price moved through it, you can see how this has become a demand zone and a volume shelf, possibly kind of a launch pad for price going into the week ahead. And we do have this longer term area of resistance that would be a level of interest if we did continue up into the week ahead. Going into Roku, you can see here that Roku was kind of the poster child of gains earlier in the week as the market was having trouble. Now Roku's having a little trouble the last couple days of the week, especially Friday. Not a lot of movement here when everything else was moving. However, the main thing is looking at this weekly chart and seeing that we are really trying to get through this ascending triangle resistance. We'll have to see if we actually break through. I do want to put another resistance line there to make it a double trend line. Notice we did not actually close above this previous high. We'll have to see if this continues up into the week ahead. But definitely a volume shelf here for the price to move up, and it has over the last couple weeks. And this is quite an interesting setup, definitely showing strength into the week ahead. PTON. This is one that we went over last week, and honestly, there's not much to change from what we looked at last week. You can see we're still trading in this channel that we created, and really trying to figure out if this is going to finally break out to the upside. If we look at the volume shelf here and anchor from this March low as we have been doing the rest, you can see that there's quite a volume shelf here telling us that there's a lot of shares traded here. So that tells us that there's been a lot of activity, and it's not just a small amount of shares trading up here on low volume. There's quite a bit of volume supporting price up here, and clearly you can see that we did hit new highs this last week. Going into Apple, Apple's one that definitely showed some strength going into the last 2 days of trading for the week. You can see here that we did close above this line. If you remember what the QQQ chart looked like, we did have a similar setup, except we did not close through this line yet. Now, the one thing that I want to point out here, and this is something that Brian Shannon from Alpha Trends taught me using the Anchored View app. Sometimes you want to use the Anchored View app from the breakout candle. So notice here we had this breakout candle in June. I anchored the View app from the breakout candle, and we almost bounced perfectly this week on the weekly side of things. You can see here, same thing. We are going to have to get through this volume shelf above, which is going to act as supply initially, and we'll have to see if that continues up. Very similar to what we just saw with SE on the weekly chart. Going into GRWG, this is one that I gotta admit looks very, very interesting into the weeks ahead. You can see here that we had this nice move up. Now we have a very strong consolidation area, definitely showing that sellers are not in control, but neither are buyers. It's just kind of neutral here, trying to figure out what price wants to do. If you see this anchored volume by price from the March low, there is a ton of volume supporting price up here, which to me may signal a stair-step type of reaction here if we do get some drying up of supply, or just an increase in demand relative to supply would also drive this way off the volume shelf to new highs. So that is one that did decent compared to some of the other wheat stocks this week. The More Act was delayed, so that probably didn't help any of these stocks. But going into the last one, this is Big Lots. This is one that definitely is showing some interesting strength into the week ahead. We haven't broken through the symmetrical triangle yet, but if it does break, it's going to go hard. We do also have the weekly candle really starting to catch a bid right above this volume shelf, and you know, this is one that's definitely had some consolidation over the last couple weeks. Will it finally break to the upside? The daily chart is suggesting possibly, but that's not for me to decide. That's for the market to decide, and we'll just have to see what happens going into the week ahead. So hopefully this video was helpful. A lot of different features used on the TrendSpider platform, and remember, if you have any questions at all, please let us know. We do have a free trial for 7 days if you want to give this a try or a shot. Remember, this video is not here to just blindly follow these charts. It's here to highlight the platform and really just go over some charts into the week ahead. So thank you everybody for your time. Everyone have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.